Hello, I'm Jashikins, and welcome finally to another episode of Jash Reads. Tonight we are going to continue Eragon by Christopher Polini. Now you might notice in the background here some stuff missing because finally we found a place to move it. So, less clutter in the back, which means this room feels a lot more free for me to actually walk around in. And it's just been like a hectic week or two, so haven't really been getting videos out. And happy Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving will happen like 1 to 2 hours after I start filming, so just, maybe you'll actually be watching this during Thanksgiving. Maybe you'll have one of those families that you just like to ignore the other, so you're going to be in a room and on your cell phone, you'll be watching this dramatic reading instead of dealing with your relatives. So I don't know why I'm smiling or thumbs upping that. But anyways, let's continue. Finally, we're getting back to this. Woohoo! Chapter 6, Tea for Two. Roran and Eragon parted at the outskirts of Carvajal. Eragon walked slowly to Brom's house, engrossed in his thoughts. He stopped at the doorstep and raised his hand to knock. A voice rasped, "What do you want, boy?" He whirled around. Behind him, Brom leaned on a twisted staff embellished with strange carvings. He wore a brown hooded robe like a friar. A pouch hung from the scuffed leather belt clasped around his waist. Above his white beard, a, a proud eagle nose hooked over his mouth and dominated his face. He peered at Eragon with deep-set eyes shadowed by a gnarled brow and waited for his reply. "To get information," Eragon said. "Roran is getting chisel fixed and I had free time, so I came to see if you could answer a few questions." The old man grunted and reached for the door. Eragon noticed a gold ring on his right hand, light glinted off a sapphire, highlighting a strange symbol carved on its face. "You might as well come in. We'll be talking a while. Your questions never seem to end." Inside, the house was darker than charcoal, an acrid smell heavy in the air. "Now for a light." Eragon heard the old man move around, and a low curse as something crashed to the floor. "Ah, here we go." A white spark flashed. A flame wavered into existence. Brom stood with a candle before a stone fireplace. Stacks of books surrounded a high-backed, deeply carved wooden chair that faced the mantel. The forelegs were shaped like eagle claws, and the seat and back were padded with leather embossed with a swirling rose pattern. A cluster of lesser chairs held piles of scrolls. Ink pots and pans were scattered across a writing desk. "Make room for yourself. But by the lost kings, be careful. This stuff is valuable." Eragon stepped over pages of parchment covered with angular runes. He gently lifted cracking scrolls off a chair and placed them on the floor. A cloud of dust flew into the air as he sat. He stifled a sneeze. Brom bent down and lit the fire with his candle. "Good. Nothing like sitting by a fire for conversation." He threw back his hood to reveal hair that was not white, but silver, then hung a kettle over the flames and settled into the high-backed chair. Now, what do you want? He addressed Eragon roughly, but not unkindly. Well, said Eragon, wondering how best to approach the subject. I keep hearing about the Dragon Riders and their supposed accomplishments. Most everyone seems to want them to return, but I've never heard tell of how they were started, where the dragons came from, or what made the riders special, aside from the dragons. Vast subject to tell about, grumbled Brom. He peered at Eragon alertly. If I told you their whole story, we would still be sitting here when winter comes again. It will have to be reduced to a manageable length. But before we start properly, I need my pipe. Eragon waited patiently as Brom tamped down the cardistweed. He liked Brom. The old man was irrational at times, but he never seemed to mind taking time for Eragon. Eragon had once asked him where he came from, and Brom had laughed, saying, "A village much like Carvajal, only not quite as interesting." Curiosity aroused, Eragon asked his uncle, but Carol could only tell him that Brom had bought a house in Carvajal nearly 15 years ago and had lived there quietly ever since. Brom used a tinderbox to light the pipe. He puffed a few times, then said, "There, we won't have to stop, except for the tea. Now, about the riders, or the Shurtugel, as they are called by the elves. Where to start? They spanned countless years and, at the height of their power, held sway over twice the Empire's lands. Numerous stories have been told about them. Most nonsense. If you believed everything said, you would expect them to have the powers of a lesser god. Scholars have devoted entire lives to separating these fictions from fact, but it's doubtful any of them will succeed. However, it isn't an impossible task if we confine ourselves to the three areas you specified: how the writers began, why they were so highly regarded, and where dragons came from. I shall start with the last item. Eragon settled back and listened to the man's mesmerizing voice. Dragons have no beginning, unless it lies with the creation of Algasia itself. And if they have an end, it will be when this world perishes, for they suffer as land does. They, the dwarves, and a few others are the true inhabitants of this land. They lived here before all others, strong and proud in their elemental glory. Their world was unchanging until the first elves sailed over the sea on their silver ships. Where did the elves come from? Interrupted Eragon. And why are they called the fair folk? Do they really exist? Brom scowled. Do you want your original question answered or not? They won't be if you want to explore every obscure piece of knowledge. Sorry, said Eragon. He dipped his head and tried to look contrite. No, you're not, said Brom with some amusement. He shifted his gaze to the fire and watched it lick the underside of the kettle. If you must know, elves are not legends. They are called the fair folk because they are more graceful than any of the other races. They come from what they call Al-Alia, though none but they know what, or even where, it is. Now, he glared from under his bushy eyebrows to make sure there would be no more interruptions. The elves were a proud race then, and strong in magic. At first they regarded dragons as mere animals. From that belief rose a deadly mistake. A brash elven youth hunted down a dragon as he would a stag and killed it. Outraged, the dragons ambushed and slaughtered the elf. Unfortunately, the bloodletting did not stop there. The dragons massed together and attacked the entire elven nation. Dismayed by the terrible misunderstanding, the elves tried to end the hostilities, but couldn't find a way to communicate with the dragons. Thus, to greatly abbreviate a complicated series of occurrences, there was a very long and very bloody war, which both sides later regretted. At the beginning, the elves fought only to defend themselves, for they were reluctant to escalate the fighting, but the dragon's ferocity eventually forced them to attack for their own survival. This lasted for 5 years and would have continued for much longer if an elf called Eragon hadn't found a dragon egg. Eragon blinked in surprise. I see you didn't know of your namesake, said Brom. No, the tea kettle whistled stridently. Why was I named after an elf? Then you should find this all the more interesting, said Brom. He hooked the kettle out of the fire and poured boiling water into 2 cups. Handing one to Eragon, he warned, "These leaves don't need to steep long, so drink quickly before it gets too strong." Eragon tried to sip, but scalded his tongue. Brom set his own cup aside and continued smoking the pipe. No one knows why that egg was abandoned. Some say the parents were killed in an elven attack. Others believe the dragons purposefully left it there. Either way, Eragon saw the value of raising a friendly dragon. He cared for it secretly and, in the custom of the ancient language, named him Bidayum. When Bidayum had grown to good size, they traveled together among the dragons and convinced them to live in peace with the elves. Treaties were formed between the 2 races. To ensure that war would never break out again, they decided that it was necessary to establish the riders. At first, the riders were intended merely as a means of communication between the elves and dragons. However, as time passed, their worth was recognized, and they were given even more authority. Eventually, they took the island Vorengard for their home and built a city on it, Daru Araba. Before Galbatorix overthrew them, the riders held more power than all the kings in Algasia. Now, I believe I have answered 2 of your questions. Yes, said Eragon absently. It seemed like an incredible coincidence that he had been named after the first rider. For some reason, his name did not feel the same anymore. What does Eragon mean? I don't know, said Brom. It's very old. I doubt anyone remembers except the elves. Unfortunately, have to smile greatly before you talked with one. It is a good name to have, though. You should be proud of it. Not everyone has one so honorable. And that's it. That's not the entire chapter, but I'm just breaking the chapter up into 2 or 3 parts. Doing a dramatic reading requires a certain amount of lung capacity, and I have asthma, so I really have to be focused on that instead of let's just chug out chapter after chapter. I'm sorry about, I don't feel like I really gave it all my all tonight. When I was practicing, it was sort of, I had a vision, and that vision sort of appeared today, definitely more near the end than in the beginning, so. And I will say I did base off some of how I voiced Brom, especially near the end there, by spoilers. You know, you later learn where Brom came from and everything as the series continues. So I'm using that spoiler information and trying to place that in Brom's voice. So. And another thing I'm sorry about is I'm going to probably be skewing up these pronunciations. I was going for, it'll be in the back of the book, and it wasn't, so I'm going to be looking up any fan wikis in the future to see if there's some pronunciations there. With the Animorphs series, which I also do dramatic reading of on this channel, there's no canonical pronunciation, so I'm worried that's going to be what's going to happen in Eragon. That's why I haven't really looked things up. I'm like, what there's really not? So. Okay. I think I'm going to leave all I think about what Brom said until the actual end of the chapter, because actually, let's do that. Because, it's like, it's a whole chapter, so I'm like breaking the chapter into even smaller bits, so let's get the whole conversation before we start discussing it. But anyways, the question for this video: what are you having for Thanksgiving? If you're in the US, what are you having for Thanksgiving? Like, what meal do you have planned? And I know it's not related to the chapter at hand, but for me, I'm going to be having Thanksgiving tomorrow, so I'd like to hear what everyone is having as a meal. Me, I'm going to go to my in-laws, so, thoughts and prayers for me. And I know, like, there's going to be ham. Maybe we'll have turkey. I think there's going to be like 1 or 2 kinds of stuffing. Yeah, not really excited. I use this this service that delivers food, and the one lady that was delivering the other day was like, she was going to have like pork, steak, ham, and I was just like, I'll trade you. Yeah. So anyways, what are you doing for Thanksgiving? And also comment anything else you noticed and thought about this part of the chapter. Please comment down below. And remember, I will be reading the entire Inheritance series, including Eragon. So if you don't want to miss a thing, please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a chapter or any of my any of my witty commentary. No, don't want to miss a thing? Subscribe, please. Also, to mess with the YouTube algorithm, like this video so more people can be tormented by me. Woo. And if you are watching this on my Blogday blog and watching on the desktop version of my Blogday blog, please choose the followed by email option so you never again miss out on wonderful blog posts by me. And blog posts don't just include these lovely Jash Reads episodes, I also do long posts, I do fan fiction, I do mini reviews, full length reviews, and I don't know what my hands are doing there. And I am going to eventually get a bunch of Death Stranding content out because I'm just binging Death Stranding content. So my thoughts and opinions on the lore will eventually come out on this channel, my blog. So, yay! So, again, hope you have a very safe Thanksgiving and you have fun. And if you are watching this while, you're supposed to be enjoying your family during Thanksgiving, it's only going to be like a few more seconds, so, keep watching, please. And then pretend to like the family members you don't like. And until next video, goodbye. Woohoo!